Put yourself in this situation. You're hungry. You haven't eaten in 2 days. Around you are dozens of plants you've never seen before. Some of them will feed you. Some of them will kill you within hours. Some of them will make you violently sick but not kill you. And some of them, the most dangerous ones, won't show any symptoms at all for the first 24 hours. You have no phone, no book, no one to ask. How do you figure out which one is safe? You probably can't. But somehow, ancient humans did. Every single day. For hundreds of thousands of years. And almost none of them got it wrong. The first thing to understand is that this wasn't guesswork. It couldn't have been. The margins were too thin, and the consequences too permanent for trial and error to explain it alone. A single wrong guess with hemlock doesn't give you a second chance. Water hemlock, one of the most common wild plants in North America, causes violent seizures within 15 minutes of ingestion. Death follows shortly after. There is no recovery window, no time to learn from the mistake. One bite. That's all it takes. If ancient humans were simply guessing and dying and passing on warnings, the math doesn't work. Too many would have died before the knowledge could spread. So something else was happening. But here's what makes this genuinely strange. When researchers first started studying ancient plant knowledge seriously, they expected to find something simple. A system, a method, a logical framework that would make the whole thing make sense. What they found instead was a puzzle that kept getting harder the deeper they looked. Because the knowledge ancient humans had wasn't just adequate, it was precise, eerily precise, in ways that guessing, even very careful, very patient guessing, simply cannot account for. Which means the real question isn't how they avoided the wrong plants. The real question is how they built knowledge that accurate, that specific, that reliable, without any of the tools we assume are necessary to do it. And the first part of that answer will seem obvious, until you realize it isn't. The first part of the answer is time, not years, not generations, hundreds of thousands of years. Modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. For almost all of that time, we lived in the same environments, eating the same plants, watching the same animals, observing the same patterns. That is an almost incomprehensible amount of accumulated observation. A grandmother who watched her grandmother who watched her grandmother, going back not 4 or 5 generations but thousands. Each one adding one small piece, each one passing it forward, each one doing it knowing that getting it wrong meant not passing anything forward at all. Anthropologists call this cumulative culture, the ability to take what someone else learned and build on it without having to relearn it from scratch. A single human lifetime is not enough to safely map an entire ecosystem of plants, but 1,000 lifetimes, layered on top of each other, passed down in story and ritual and demonstration. That is something else entirely. It sounds like we've solved it. We haven't. Because cumulative culture only works if there is already something to pass down. Knowledge has to start somewhere, before the chain of grandmothers, before the first story was ever told, before there was a single safe plant marked as safe. Someone had to be the first to figure it out. Alone, with no accumulated knowledge, no one to learn from. In a world where the wrong answer meant dying alone in a field within the hour. How did that first person survive long enough to tell anyone anything? That raises a question researchers struggled with for a long time. And the answer, when they found it, came from a direction nobody expected. Animals did it first. Every species that shares an ecosystem with toxic plants has developed some mechanism for avoiding them. Goats avoid ragwort instinctively. Birds that eat certain berries leave others completely untouched. Elephants have been documented traveling miles out of their way to reach specific mineral-rich soils when sick. Ancient humans watched all of it. Which berries the birds ate safely, which leaves the deer avoided, which plants grew near water that animals refused to drink from. And for a moment, that sounds like the complete answer. Animals were the test cases. Humans watched. Problem solved. Except it isn't that simple. And here's why that assumption could get you killed. Many of the foods animals eat safely would kill a human being outright. Horses can eat red maple leaves, toxic to humans. Birds consume berries containing compounds that would stop a human heart. Goats digest plants that cause fatal liver failure in people. Watching animals eat something was useful data, but it was never safe to simply copy them. The animals weren't running the same biological system. What kept them alive would not always keep a human alive. So watching animals wasn't the answer. It was only part of it. That still doesn't explain everything, because if ancient humans couldn't just copy animals, and guessing was too dangerous, and the knowledge had to start somewhere before it could be passed down, then what was actually happening in those first moments of discovery? It turns out evolution had been quietly building ancient humans a tool for exactly this problem, and most people have no idea they're still carrying it. The human body did not evolve in a vacuum. It co-evolved alongside the very plants it needed to identify. Bitter taste receptors exist specifically because most toxic plant compounds are bitter. Your tongue is, in part, a poison detector. Not a perfect one, but sensitive enough to flag danger before a lethal dose is consumed. Ancient humans learned to trust that signal in a way modern humans have almost entirely unlearned. A plant that tasted wrong was set down. A plant with an unfamiliar smell was left alone. These weren't superstitions. They were biological warning systems refined over millions of years of exactly this problem. But here's where it gets harder. The plants were evolving too. Some toxic plants taste sweet, deliberately. They evolved sweetness specifically to attract animals that spread their seeds, while concentrating their toxins in the parts that would kill those same animals if consumed in the wrong quantities. The plant is running a strategy. Ancient humans had to learn which plants were lying to them with flavor, and some of them only found out the hard way. One wrong bite, no second chance. The stakes were always that high. But then ancient humans did something even more unbelievable than learning to avoid poison. They learned to turn it into medicine. Take the foxglove plant. Purple, bell-shaped, visually striking, it contains digitalis, which directly affects the heart. Ancient healers identified it as a heart plant thousands of years before modern chemistry existed. They were right, not because of magic, because accumulated observation across enough human lifetimes had connected the plant's effects to outcomes precisely enough that the knowledge held, even without anyone understanding the chemistry behind it. That's remarkable enough on its own. But then researchers found something that made even that seem small. This is the part that stopped scientists cold. In 2019, researchers studying indigenous plant knowledge in the Amazon found something that modern pharmaceutical science still cannot fully explain. Isolated communities, with no contact with the outside world and no access to modern chemistry, had independently identified over 300 plants with confirmed pharmacological properties. Plants that treat infections, plants that regulate blood pressure, plants that act as natural anesthetics, and in some cases the preparation methods they used, boiling specific plants together, combining roots with bark, drying leaves at specific times of year, were so chemically precise that replicating them in a laboratory produced identical results. They didn't know the chemistry, but they knew the outcome. That raises an even bigger question. How? How do you arrive at that level of precision without instruments, without controls, without any of the infrastructure modern science considers essential? One researcher spent decades trying to answer exactly that. Ethnobotanist Wade Davis lived with indigenous communities across the world, studying their plant knowledge up close. What he found changed how he thought about knowledge itself. He said the pharmacopoeia of any indigenous culture represents not folklore, but an empirical body of knowledge acquired over thousands of years of direct interaction with the biological world. In other words, it's science, done without a laboratory, done with time, observation, and consequence instead of instruments. The consequences were the controls, but that still leaves one final mystery, and it might be the strangest one of all. How do you preserve thousands of years of precise scientific knowledge without writing a single word of it down? The knowledge was embedded in songs and stories and ceremonies specifically designed to preserve information accurately across generations. The song wasn't decoration, the story wasn't entertainment, they were the database. A way of encoding pharmacological knowledge in a format that could survive 1,000 years without paper or writing or any physical record at all. In cultures that have maintained continuity with their ancestral knowledge, ethnobotanists have found that the plant information encoded in oral tradition is, in many cases, chemically verifiable. The song describes the plant. The plant does what the song says it does. Across generations that had no way to confirm it except by using it and watching what happened. One wrong generation, one broken chain, one song forgotten, and the knowledge was gone forever. The stakes were always that high. So, back to where we started. Could you actually survive in their world? Starting from scratch, alone, with no accumulated knowledge and no one to learn from? No, almost certainly not. But that was never how ancient humans did it either. They didn't do it alone. They didn't do it in a single lifetime. They did it together, across hundreds of generations, in a chain of observation and transmission so long and so carefully maintained that by the time any single person needed the knowledge, it was already there, waiting. Encoded in a story someone learned as a child from someone who learned it as a child from someone who had learned it the same way. The knowledge that kept them alive wasn't instinct. It wasn't luck. It was something far more extraordinary. It was the accumulated attention of thousands of human lifetimes, pointed at the same question, building one answer together across more time than any individual mind could hold. You inherited that too. You just forgot where it came from.